Take it away, Dr. Perlis.
All right. So thanks again for the invitation to speak today about my research. Here are some of my conflicts of interest. You can advance the slide. So I'm going to go over a couple things, a couple of slides on the background around prostate cancer in case some of you don't know too much about it. And then I'll focus on two of the main projects that I'm doing. One is an innovative way to help communicate test results to patients. And we have a few clinical trials working on that. And then another way is an innovative way to treat prostate cancer. And you can think of this almost as like the lumpectomy in breast cancer, where you just take out the lump and not the whole breast. We're looking at ways to treat just the tumor and not the whole prostate, which is quite innovative for prostate cancer. And you can advance the slide now. This is to remind us why we're here, and I think some of us in our introductions have already done this, but cancer is still quite a killer in our society, and prostate cancer is still the second biggest killer, even though many prostate cancers are indolent, many are not. So we really need to do a lot of work here. Next slide, please. And just to remind you, I am a participant as well. I was on the Ride to Conquer Cancer 2 years ago. Last year, I did the Journey to Conquer Cancer, and with COVID coming up, I didn't quite hit my target, but I did pretty well. And this year, I'll be in the Weekender with my family, and I'm really, really looking forward to raising lots of money, and part of it to really push the research that I myself am doing with my lab. You can advance the slide. So, prostate cancer is typically, there's a blood test, you have an abnormal PSA, or there's a strong family history. So the family doctor or the urologist does a rectal exam or gets an MRI, and you put it all together, and then you go for a biopsy. And the biopsy samples tissue in the prostate. And when the pathologist looks at it under the microscope, they can get a sense of if there's cancer there or not, and how nasty, how aggressive the cancer looks, which leads you to get a sense of, do you need to do more tests, or can you go for treatment, or can you just watch it? You can advance the slide now. So part of the interesting about getting the information back is that health systems were designed to give information between doctors. So a radiology report or a pathology report is written in a language and a style and has design that is intended for physicians and not patients. You can keep advancing here. So, when we think about pathology or a prostate biopsy or an X-ray, there's no way that patients really are set up to understand the information. You can advance the slide. So what we thought is that now that people have access to their medical records online, wouldn't it be really great if we could add to the traditional record and create reports that are understandable to patients, and that can help them in their journey to help to be part of the of choosing what the best treatment is for their cancers. So we created something called a PACER, which is a patient-centered radiology report, and we got funding to create these things and also to test them. So phase 1 of our study was to create them, and phase 2 was actually to roll them out into a clinical trial, and we did that actually in our clinics here at Princess Margaret. You can advance the slide. There were a lot of steps into trying to create this thing, so we did it scientifically. Step 1 is we interviewed a whole bunch of patients and experts. Advance the slide. Then we created a first draft of the prototype, and we collaborated with all these amazing groups at University Health Network that are specialized in design and patient education and how to release the information online for patients. Advance the slide. We then took that information back to patients and interviewed them again to make this thing even more sophisticated. Advance the slide. And that really led us to the final prototype. And we published that prototype in a medical journal. We went back to the Canadian Institute of Health Research with this prototype, and we said, can we have more money? We want to roll this out in a clinical trial. And lucky enough, we got the funds to do the clinical trial. You can advance the slide. And we actually did a clinical trial where we randomly assigned patients to either get only the traditional report or to get the traditional report and the patient-centered one that was individualized to them. You can advance the slide. These are the things that we focused on when we were creating the prototype. So we wanted the product to meet the patient at their level of understanding. The tone of voice and assistive visuals were appropriate and reliable to patients. Number 2, advance. Our product was going to inform patients without overwhelming them. So we got feedback that on traditional reports, there's so much information, it's hard to know what's important. So we really tried to keep it simple. And design principle number 3, if you could advance the slide, was that we wanted to enable space for conversation. So that's actual physical space so that the patients could write on it or the physicians could write on it, that it's not going to tell the whole story, but it's going to lead them to be able to communicate better in their meeting with their clinician. And you can advance the slide. These are all the specific things that we figured out were important from interviews with patients and with experts. You can advance the slide. So we had open-ended questions. We had more specific questions. You can advance the slide. And then we ended up with this, which is really exciting and really cool and is just getting published in a nice journal. And the left side is the actual reports. You have the patient information. You have very plain language to show where the prostate is, where the spots were found, what it might mean. And then page number 2 is a glossary, which explains some of the language that we used on page number 1. It tells you what steps to take. And this is all individually tailored for the results that specific patient got. You can advance the slide. So then we went to this clinical trial, and the objective was to explore whether it's going to improve things. Will it improve patient knowledge? Will it facilitate better therapeutic relationship? Will it actually enhance the patient experience? Because that's what we were aiming for. Advance the slide. And like I already explained, we basically just took people in the regular clinical setting. If they were going to be getting a prostate MRI, we just randomly assigned them to either get the traditional one or to get the traditional one with the patient-centered one. You can continue. And what we found, I mean, this is also actively being drafted up in a manuscript because the clinical trial is done, that it actually did. It improved patients' ability to express themselves. It made them better able to clarify what the doctor was explaining to them. And they were actually specifically better able to identify what was normal and what was abnormal in their prostate MRI. So, and it actually didn't increase the time of the visit. So there was a lot of anxiety from clinicians. Oh, it's another thing in our clinic visit, but it didn't. The visits with the pacer were the exact same length as the visits without the pacer. You can advance the slide. So who knows how this is going to impact? I mean, is it really going to improve the patient experience? Ours was just a small clinical trial, but we really do believe in it. We're trying to make the whole experience more patient-centered. And again, the whole point is that so when the patient gets to the clinic visit, they can communicate better with the doctor, and actually so that the doctor can communicate better with the patient. Because if the patient is more informed leading up to it, then you can sort of skip the basics and you can really get into the meat and potatoes of that clinical visit. You can advance the slide. So, I mean, the bottom line is that we are actively working on this. We're doing it now with pathology reports. We got a third grant to do that. We've had some funding from generous donors to try and do this for kidney as well. And really the aim is to expand this all across Canada, if not North America. But the next key step, which may be the hardest, is to figure out how to automatically generate a pacer from a traditional report. And that's something that we are working on. You can advance the slide. I think I just mentioned all these things, so you can advance the slide as well. So going back to prostate cancer 101, once you've been diagnosed with prostate cancer, then the question is, what are your treatment options? And traditionally, the treatments for prostate cancer is either surgery, which I'm actually about to go do in a few minutes, where you remove the whole prostate, or radiation, where you radiate the whole prostate. And those two options have excellent control for cancer, but they do have side effects. A lot of men will have problems controlling their urine, with their sexual function. So in some people, it's completely appropriate because the cancers are quite aggressive. But then we start asking ourselves, and you can advance the slide here. Now that we have better imaging, and sometimes we realize that the cancers are only in a specific spot of the prostate, so you can see it lighting up there in the center of that gentleman's prostate, shouldn't we think about maybe just treating the cancer and leaving the rest of the gland? And we call that focal therapy or partial gland ablation. And that's something that is also a very keen interest of mine, and something that we're taking on with several clinical trials. And you can advance the slide. So who might be eligible for something like focal therapy? Well, again, the tumors can't be too big because we have to be able to get around the tumor with the treatment. We don't want to have a lot of cancer anywhere else in the prostate because we're going to leave a lot of the prostate untreated. And we have to think that, and the whole point is to maintain the quality of life. So if I have to treat a tumor that's, for example, close to a sphincter, and I'm going to damage the sphincter, then there's probably no point in doing that sort of treatment for that sort of tumor. So it does require quite a sophisticated understanding about prostate anatomy, margins, and what is possible with the different technologies. You can advance the slide. So we've had a few clinical trials here. This is actually phase 1 of our HIFU MRI trial, and we just got phase 2 published yesterday in the Journal of Radiology, but it wasn't published yet when I put these slides together. So I just put up the image from our phase 1 trial. It's this really neat device. It's a company out of Israel that we collaborated with. So the patients go into the MRI machine. This device actually goes into their rectum. We can target the prostate tumor, and then it sends ultrasound energy to the tumor. We monitor the treatment in real time with MRI that can tell us the temperature of the tissue, and we can make sure that we've basically burned the tumor and a margin around the tumor safely to try and get rid of this tumor, but to maintain the prostate and to maintain quality of life. And you can advance to the next slide. So this is a little picture of the apparatus that we have in the control room. So we outline the prostate, we outline the rectum. You can advance to the next slide. And we basically mark it in yellow there in the top left slide. You can see we've marked out the area that we want to treat. And to the slide to the right of it, that green marks out that as the HIFU energy goes into that orange area, we sort of also end up treating the green area. So because we also want a nice margin. The bottom left shows you in real time as we're burning with the MRI, it shows us how hot it's getting. So we can monitor the treatment as we're going. And then the bottom right is the post-treatment MRI where we give contrast. And we can see that the black areas are the areas that are dead. And you can see that we really nicely treated that tumor, and the patients go home the same day. Next slide. From the phase 2 trial, this is when we had 32 patients. We just published on 44 patients yesterday. 93% of the patients had their tumors completely ablated with this technology when we did a post-treatment biopsy at 6 months after treatment, and there were no major adverse events. So this is really awesome technology and really exciting. You can advance to the next slide. So another thing that we're doing aside from the HIFU energy is something that's a little bit more in-house designed. And this was, I have to give credit to John Trachtenberg, one of my mentors as I was training here. He and a collaboration between medical physics, radiology, interventional radiology, created this really cool device that allows you to put a laser fiber into the prostate tumor, and you basically burn it to death. But you use the MRI machine again to look at the temperature as you're treating. And a lot of these efforts were funded by donor dollars. So this is something that we are continuously fundraising for. You can go to the next slide. This is the device that they designed. It's MRI safe. It connects to the MRI gantry, and we have a 3D system that this machine allows us to get the laser fiber into the tumor at the appropriate angle that we want. It's really amazing technology, and we're the only people in the world doing something like this. Next slide. So you can see here that it allows us to create a 3D image of the prostate and the tumor so we can decide on the angle of approach for this laser fiber. Next slide. This is us in real time placing the needle fibers, and the patient is in the MRI machine there. That's next slide. Yep, next slide. And as we were placing the laser fiber, we're watching it go in but with the MRI machine. So it's really, really accurate. Next slide. And this is the image that we get after we've contoured everything. We've placed the fiber. We've confirmed that it's in the right position, and then we turn it on. And then the MRI again lets us watch the ablation as it's happening in real time to see what temperatures we are reaching to make sure that we're going to get it hot enough. Next slide. So really, that's most of what I wanted to share today. This is ongoing. The clinical trial with the patient-centered reports. I had a meeting yesterday with my team. We're doing it for prostate biopsies. We're now collaborating with pathologists all over the province to start the process of thinking how we can automate the creation of these from traditional reports. The focal therapy trials, we treated a patient 2 days ago with the focal laser ablation. Like I mentioned, this is donor funded and supported through the foundation. We initially got several grants, but again, we're growing up, and we're going to try to keep going with these trials to try and show that this is usable technology, so that eventually, hopefully, the government will help fund these types of things. But at this point, we're still trying to perfect our technique to prove to people that this is something that is worth doing. Believe it or not, there's a lot of pushback about focal therapy. A lot of people out there think the only way to treat prostate cancer is to treat the whole prostate. So this is cutting edge, sophisticated interventions that we are actively pursuing here. And people from around the world look to us for these specific things and to teach them how we're doing them. And we like to keep these programs going really, really strong. So, to keep some of these projects in mind when we're fundraising for the weekend, I think is important. And like I said, it's not just about having people live longer, it's also having people live better, right? So that's really a primary aim for research that I do through my lab. You can go to the
one of the things I've already invested in.
Someone is unmuted and we can hear you speaking, just FYI. Next page. So yeah, thank you so much for your attention here today. I don't know if there is time for questions, but I'm definitely willing to chat about this research and any opportunities that we have. And I look forward to the weekend and fundraising to keep these projects going. Thanks so much.
There definitely is time for questions. I'm just gonna, can everybody see Dr. Perlis now on the screen?
Well, we can see me too. Well, why don't we?
I don't know. That's how it's displaying. Maybe I could show more people.
I think you need to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, just unshare.
Okay, I'll do that.
There we go.
Now can everybody see more than just Dr. Perlis and Steve?
And now you too, Stacy.
Excellent. Okay, so let's open it up. If anybody has any questions for Dr. Perlis, now's your chance.
I could just jump in real quick and say, you know, the word that came to mind as you were kind of finishing up there, Dr. Perlis, was trailblazer. And in fact, when we were first thinking about renaming the weekend when it was called One Walk Before, we were contemplating the word trailblazer. And I would say that what you're doing is trailblazer work. You know, when you first started out, it was all about patient experience and trying to dumb it down for a patient who gets really intimidated by all the. So I loved how the patient experience was one thing you're working on, and then on the other side, it's about the science and about making patient outcomes better, and so they can live better longer. So I love what you guys are working on. I just wanted to comment on that and see if there's any questions from the group.
Yeah, please.
I have a question. Sorry, I should have put my hand up, but I never know how to do that. I'm wondering, because I, like Steve, really agree with that. Your patient experience journey, and does that make these procedures more successful because you actually change the person's way of looking at it in peace of mind? And a lot of things that happen in medicine are about positivity. You know, have you noticed that?
Yes. So I think I appreciate your comment, and I think you're absolutely right. And you know, patients need to partner with the clinicians in their treatment decisions. And there's a lot of evidence in the literature to show that when patients feel or are more informed, there's less decisional regret. And for sure, I mean, a lot of a patient's perception of their outcome or their actual hard outcome has a lot to do with, you know, having appropriate expectations about engagement with the whole healthcare team, not just the physician. And those are specific things that we are finding are better for the patients who are in the stream of having these patient-centered reports. Because right from the beginning, we are educating them and we're empowering them really to be part of their own healthcare moving forward. So it's been really, really exciting. We've gotten a lot of amazing feedback from patients. We're also exploring how it affects healthcare givers because, you know, when a patient gets, right now on the online portal, I mean, the patient will have a biopsy, it'll populate in their portal. Their visit with their clinician may not be for 2 weeks away. You know, how do they sit with that information? A, it may be scary. B, they just may not be able to understand it. And C, they may not have someone else in their house that can help them digest it. So we are finding that by providing these types of reports, it's alleviating some anxieties. It's also really preparing them for that a super important clinic visit that will happen when they come to discuss the radiology report or that prostate or the pathology report.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a question about global partnerships. If nobody else has a question. I just was curious. You mentioned that this was sort of initiated in partnership with an organization in Israel, and I'm just wondering, did they reach out to us or did we reach out to them, and how did that relationship develop? Because we could see now that you're moving it to the next level. It's going to have a global impact emanating from Princess Margaret.
Yeah, so to be honest, I don't know all the details. It was quite some time ago. The story had been told to me at one point, but I can't remember. We did have quite a lot of like groundwork done here in terms of prostate MRI. So prostate MRI gurus came out of Princess Margaret, and I believe that it was actually through the imaging part that led them to be the initial experts on doing that temperature bit of like knowing how hot it is as you're going. And then these companies, a lot of which, you know, the one out of Israel, we ended up doing a partnership. But at the end of the day, now it's their product. So that MRI HIFU thing is no longer necessarily a Princess Margaret thing. I mean, we were the first clinical site to do these trials, so we will still be, you know, part of rolling it out, and we'll be looked to as leaders in it. But that's why the sort of the laser bit, which is still really the technology, is in our hands. It really came out of our labs, and is still being driven by donor dollars, is the one that is in some ways a little bit more exciting for me, because we still have ownership of it completely. And now we're starting to sort of think about how we are going to not necessarily commercialize it, but the next steps, so that eventually it can be, you know, rolled out, because you don't want everything to be a pilot project. I mean, you really want to make a difference globally.
Of course. Thank you. Okay, I'll open up the floor just to anybody else. Any last minute questions before Dr. Perlis goes into surgery? None? All right. Well then, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.